Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Talk Marketing. Today we've got Mira Wise joining us. She's Marketing Operations Manager at SendCloud. Marketing Ops is basically the engine room that keeps campaigns running, but it's almost never as clean as the dashboard make it look like. Today we're totally skipping the high-level strategy part. Instead, we're going to focus about the reality of revenue and marketing operations, meaning how data, systems, and processes actually come together behind the scenes to drive pipeline, and bridging that awkward gap between stakeholder requests and technical reality. Welcome, Mira, and yeah, great to have you on the show. Do you want to give us a quick intro about yourself and what do you do?
Yeah, of course. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Mira. I'm originally from the US, but based in Barcelona. At the moment, I'm working for a Dutch company, but Barcelona is my home base. And yeah, early on in my career, I did a little bit of everything in marketing for startups and small businesses. So I was doing, paid social events, life cycle. And then eventually that kind of evolved more into marketing automation and operations, so more systems and processes. And then that eventually evolved into more of a revenue operations focused role. So now what I really do is I work with the full go-to-market team. So marketing, sales, customer success, partnerships for B2B SaaS companies and kind of helping them build the systems and the processes that keep their day-to-day running, and also making sure that the leaders of those teams have the data that they need to know whether or not their teams are being successful.
Perfect. I love the summary, short and sweet. So now you're into ops and revenue. Let's look at the normal Tuesday for you. What exact software did you have open in your screen when you were actually looking at how to keep things running across the go-to-market teams?
Yeah, so I would say I spend probably 80% of my time in HubSpot. My day normally starts and ends there. So that's kind of the backbone of our tooling for all of our go-to-market teams. So we have a couple of different instances, but every one of those teams is essentially using HubSpot. We have HubSpot Marketing Automation Platform, and we also use HubSpot CRM. So I spend a lot of time there managing kind of workflows and dashboards and reporting and those types of things. And then, of course, I'm working in a lot of other systems that the marketing team is using. So like Customer IO, which we use to communicate with customers via email or in app. And yeah, of course, all of these middleware tools or AI tools like Zapier or N8N. I spend a lot of time, as I'm sure most of us do now, in Claude and ChatGPT and using AI. And yeah, of course, Slack has always opened on my screen, especially being remote. Slack is like my lifeline. So that's also always opened. And then, we have reporting systems like Mixpanel and Tableau for more deeper analysis.
Do you have any favorite tool? I mean, I feel that Slack is the one, but HubSpot is the tool you probably use the most. So is there any tool that you can rely on totally, or any other tools where you think, okay, maybe this one will let me down at some point?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like it's funny, it's both the tool that I rely on the most and that I spend the most of my time in, but also because of that, it's sometimes the tool that frustrates me the most because we really use HubSpot to like its max capabilities, especially as a CRM. And HubSpot is really good it has an incredible UI. It's very easy to use. It's very easy for a marketer or a salesperson to use. And it's also all in one. So that's really nice. If you have HubSpot marketing and CRM, you're not managing something like a Salesforce and Marketo Sync, which can be a big headache. So that's all lovely about HubSpot. But then there are trade-offs to that, which means that the tool is not always as robust as some of those enterprise systems. So eventually you hit a ceiling of, okay, I'm trying to accomplish this thing, and I realize that I've kind of maxed out what HubSpot can do. So I do really like the tool. I think that they're also very agile and they release a lot of things much faster than an enterprise company typically would in that space. But yeah, at the same time, sometimes you realize, oh, I have to build this outside of HubSpot, or I have to build this from scratch because the tool just can't support it.
Well, not every tool is perfect, but if it gets most of the job done, that's already a start. Moving into workflows, when you hand over, I'm sure, a very pretty dashboard to the marketing team, What does the actual workflow look like to get the data clean?
Yeah, so I think when I'm handing over a dashboard, I think there's a few things that I keep in mind. One of those things is obviously QAing the data, making sure it makes sense, double checking that it's accurate, and double checking that like the visualizations that you're using are the best way to look at that data. But I think I normally take a step back before we even get into that point of building the dashboard. And I think that that workflow starts with who the audience of this dashboard is and what they actually want to measure. Because you might have something like, we need a full funnel marketing dashboard, and that's great, but is a CMO going to be looking at this? Or is this also campaign managers that are going to be looking at this? Because, of course, those two people care about different metrics and on a different granularity. And then I think it's important that either it suits both, or you're building something like two dashboards so that the person that you're building this for gets the high level insights that they need or the detailed insights that they need. So I think I'm typically starting with, what does success look like and who's going to use this? And then you get into the part of, okay, do I have all of the data that I need in that system? If I don't, how do I pull that data in? And how do I visualize that in a way that makes the most sense for the stakeholders that are going to be using it?
Yeah, that totally makes sense to first start with the stakeholder, you address it, and then which are the data points that you need in there and how you get them in there. So I was wondering, is there any step within this workflow that is smoother than others, and or any part that where you feel, wow, this is always the same part where, you know, I have to hustle for things and it's not as smooth as you would like it to be?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty lucky now. We've done a lot of work to build up our data infrastructure, especially in tools like HubSpot. And we have a really big data operations team that will help you get everything from our data warehouse that we would need on a customer into our systems. So we're pretty good at, if something is missing, then I know exactly who to go to, and they can help me push that data in so that we can build those reports. But there are also always things that, yeah, maybe you can't really report on that in HubSpot as reliably. So you do end up going out and looking in like a spreadsheet to do a deeper analysis, or going with the data team and saying, hey, I think this is better for Tableau. Something like a multi-touch attribution model, for example, is something that I would always choose to report on in Tableau than within HubSpot directly. But I think for the majority of these things that we build, we're pretty lucky that we have a really solid base for all of the data that comes in there.
Cool. Yeah. Going a little bit deeper into workflows and also pipeline. Did you ever have a major data migration or system implementation in place where you know, like had several tools actually touching the data? In case yes, which were those tools that you touched? And was there also like a specific bottleneck within the process?
Yeah, so I think one of our biggest projects over the last couple of years was actually rolling out HubSpot as a marketing automation platform. So our business used HubSpot CRM for many years, but we didn't actually have one centralized marketing automation platform. And when you're moving to a platform like that, not only do you need to think about how you're going to build this for the marketing team to use, how is this going to suit the business for the next 5 years, how can this scale, right? You're setting up all these processes from scratch. But you also have all of these different tools that you were using to essentially replicate an all-in-one system. So in our case, for example, we were building our landing pages on WordPress. Our forms were in a tool called ConvertFlow. Our emails lived in Intercom. So then you're actually taking all of this data and you're trying to consolidate that into one tool on seeing how you can also have the data continuity so that there's no line in the sand of, oh, that was untrackable, and now we can track that via HubSpot. But also, can we pull that data in and try to create some historicals there? So that can definitely be a bit of a challenge. But ultimately, I think moving to one centralized tool, while it's still change management for the team, marketers need to get used to using an entirely new system, is definitely for the best of the business and makes things way more scalable to manage.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that because when you have different tools and you want to make sure that you have one source of truth, and HubSpot is going to be the system where the truth should lie in, you also want to make sure that the systems playing with HubSpot are also ensuring that reliability. And I was wondering, was there any like breaking point when you did this whole migration to HubSpot within the system? Like, how did you manage to ensure that the data was actually telling the truth?
Yeah. Well, there were many breaking points, I would say, which I think also makes sense for startups and scale ups, that you have really like legacy things that were built very early on that now you realize, that was really scrappy. And now we kind of need to adjust this because our business has grown and we're more sophisticated. But I think, yeah, one of the main things for us when we moved to HubSpot was, before HubSpot, we almost had a very, very simplified attribution. We basically had one field that said this came from outbound, this came from marketing, this came from partnerships. And then when you move into HubSpot, you have more advanced attribution, which is great, but that also means that now you used to have this like one field that doesn't work anymore, because now you're looking at not just one touch point, but you're looking at maybe first and last. And so I think the technical side of that was not so much the challenge, but it was more so getting all of the teams aligned in moving to this new model of like what first and last means, and especially changing that mindset for something like a sales team where they're using that to, pay out commissions. And that's what quote unquote credit means for their team, that partnerships brought this number of leads or sales brought this number of leads. And now you're moving to something much more advanced, that the technical side of it, of course, there were technical hurdles and many hiccups. But I think that the most difficult part actually was the alignment, was getting all of those teams on board, deciding how you're going to track things moving forward, making sure that you get their agreements and also that they understand how it works. And that kind of thing, I think, is actually more of a challenge than the technical side.
Yeah, you mentioned attribution, which is already looking at how do you want to measure success and how you want to attribute and who gets kind of the credit, which channel, which campaign. So looking at metrics, success metrics in this case, how do you actually know an analytics overhaul worked, and what specific metric proves to you that it was a success?
Yeah, so I think for something like this, it's because you were going from a previous scenario where you really only had one data point. I think even though things might be a little bit uncomfortable from moving to this new system, ultimately success ends up being trust, right? That now you do have these new data points, but also people understand them. You get less questions about what that means. Those stakeholders know where to go and find the metrics that are important for them. So I think all of that is more important to me than a particular KPI, right? It's more so, are these like new dashboards that you built with all of this data, are they being used? Do people understand what they mean? Is marketing using them to actually make decisions? And then when you start getting less of the questions of like, is this right? Or how does this work? Can I trust this? And you see the business leaders actually using that to make decisions, then I think that's where I would consider that a success. Of course, you have, let's say, some smaller things throughout of, you're going to start looking at, unexpected values. You're going to have safety nets when you're building these things so that you're alerted when something doesn't fit the process that you defined, or something's missing a source, let's say, to put it into a really practical example. And once you start to see those taper off because you've checked up all the things that you missed, then I think it moves to, trust.
So basically, your success metric is the usage of the dashboards. Do you know, for your stakeholders, the marketing team, the leadership team, is there one or two main metrics that they use actually to, apart from the usage, obviously, but metrics that they use to make decisions from the dashboards?
Yeah, so I think one thing that all of our go-to-market teams really focus on, because it's really important for C-level as well, is revenue. So I think it's really easy to focus on, high-level funnel metrics, let's say. How many leads did this campaign bring, or how many SQLs? But ideally, we can actually trail that back to how much revenue came on average from that particular campaign. So when they have the ability to look backwards, then they become really powerful in their marketing, because there could be two campaigns running and one of them generates, I don't know, a 25% conversion rate to SQLs, and one of them generates a 10% conversion rate. And if you just stop there, then you're like, great, this 25% conversion rate campaign is actually doing much better. But if you wait to see what the revenue outcome is of those customers and you realize actually that 10% is bringing us way more revenue on average per customer, then that changes your mindset a little bit and where you're actually going to double down on your money and try to invest more and try to make that a little bit more successful. So I think we always try to tie it back to revenue whenever we can. Obviously, that's easier said than done. Tracking is not always perfect, but when they can do that, I think that that's what they look at first.
And it totally makes sense to look at the actual ROI that brings a campaign, because if you invest money and you want to see what the results are, so for me, it's very logical that this one KPI or one success metric is the one that they might be focusing more on to make decisions on where to invest their further money. So, but yeah, it's interesting also to see how for you, the success is actually if they use the dashboard in the first place. So moving into a little bit like, like the hustle part and things going south sometimes, or maybe more of the times than we want to admit. Tell me about a real story from your experience about a reporting setup that broke or some migration that actually required like a massive hustle, scrambling to fix it on the fly, and how you turned, like that fire into a stable process.
Yeah, so I think one practical example is when we officially made the move to HubSpot. We have, of course, like HubSpot has a tracking pixel on that you put on your website, and that's going to track all the interactions with a particular person. And that's where all of these source properties end up getting defined from, is based on this cookie. And we had a lot of subdomains for our company. So we had, let's say, .com, .es, .fr, and we also had subdomains for where our app lives and where our sign up form to create an account for our app lives. And so in that case, we, had just launched HubSpot. We just launched our new source tracking, and we're looking at the data and we're seeing that we have a really big portion of direct traffic. And that's, it's becoming more and more common that you see that, especially with things like cookie blockers and those types of things. But we realized this was actually pretty big, and we're like, okay, we need to dive into, is something going wrong here? Or is this just that now that we have all of this in place, a lot of our users aren't even giving us the consent to be tracking them? And what we realized actually is that our cross-domain tracking between all of those pages was broken. So someone could go to .com and then switch to .nl, and that would be considered a whole new session, a direct conversion, let's say, direct source. And ultimately, that was not the case. So we were losing a lot of visibility into what was happening with campaigns from that. And from the marketing team, when we're talking about our website, that's within your control. Let's say your marketers can go in and we can fix that. But when you're talking about something that's owned by the product and development team, then things become much more complex because they are typically really busy working in tight sprints. You have to kind of book things in, and they have their own goals that they're tracking. So that created a scramble for us because we were like, we can change this, but signups are one of the key metrics that we also look at the very top of the funnel. And if we can't measure that correctly, we're in a really bad place. So what we need to do is fix that immediately. And so, yeah, we did a couple of things. One was working with product and engineering to make sure that we were passing all that information between all of our subdomains correctly. And another part of that was actually finding a way to identify within HubSpot if something was really direct traffic or if something was unknown traffic because cookies were declined. So there was kind of a smart way that we found with some of the HubSpot data to say, all right, of this direct traffic, let's say 50% of it really is direct. 25% of it is from this bug that we need to fix and we're working on. And this other 25% is actually traffic that we know we can't track. So it definitely created a scramble. But I think when you break it down like that towards leaders and they understand what went wrong, how we're fixing it, and then also to understand, okay, it's not quite as big. It's 25%, not a full, 100% of what we thought it was. That also helps bring the trust back, which I think you can lose in situations like this.
Well, and in the end, if you manage to have more accuracy, even though it was needed like this scramble in the beginning, but now you have a better breakdown on the direct traffic or unknown traffic, you could almost say, okay, you're in a better place than before because now you have more accuracy in your data.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a part of that. When you're rolling out a system from scratch, you can always refer back to that. Even if you start tracking something and the metrics aren't, let's say, positive, right? They're not as good as marketing thought they would be. What you can also say is, okay, no, they're not as good as you thought they would be. But what this means is that you now have this data at your fingertips, which you didn't have before. And you were able to figure that out within 2 days instead of 2 months. So now you can actually pivot and you are, yeah, much more, let's say, data first in that sense. So that also helps when you're building something out from scratch and things are a little bumpy. You can also say, yeah, but before we couldn't track this at all. So we're still moving towards the right direction, even if there are some hiccups along the way.
Yeah, and it's always like an iteration process when it comes to data because you have new sources, new processes, new ways of measuring. So it's always something ongoing. But in the end, we'll have to always juggle the two sides of actually doing the work and then things that might come the way to how you can smoothen those out. Cool. And moving also into the tech stack and the daily reality, before you already mentioned the tools you work on and HubSpot not being, like the perfect stack, but making the job most of the time where you're working on and creating dashboards and managing data. Is there a recurring limitation in your primary ops tool, which I assume is HubSpot, that is driving you completely crazy? And in case there is, do you have any hack around it?
Yeah, so one of my biggest qualms with HubSpot is that, so my previous CRM was Salesforce, and HubSpot CRM does not have a campaign member like a Salesforce CRM has. A campaign member is basically an individual object that would track all of the touch points in a customer's journey. So if they register for a webinar, you have a track of that and you know exactly where that registration came from. Maybe it was from social media, right? Then 3 months later, there's another one, or they fill out a demo and you get a really nice full version of all of those important touch points. And HubSpot doesn't give you that. HubSpot gives you first and last. And I mean, that's great, right? That's still better than what we had before in our case. But of course, from a marketing team's perspective, you're missing a huge chunk of visibility on what's actually happening with everyone that's in your funnel. And so we did a couple of hacks around this. One of those was our data analyst actually built a custom attribution model, which lives outside of HubSpot and in Tableau, because all of those digital data points are there. It's just not visible on HubSpot's UI. So if you can pull that from the back end, then you have the ability to actually get all of those touch points and build a more advanced attribution model. But what HubSpot still doesn't do is consider all of the like offline conversions that happen even via that backend data. So let's say someone attends an event and we upload a list of all the attendees of our session. That's going to be missed in HubSpot's actual tracking because that's not happening online. So what we actually had to do was build, essentially replicating the Salesforce kind of campaign member inside of HubSpot. That way we could take that out and plug that into the attribution model. And you realize that that changes those weights a lot, because if you're not considering anything that's coming from, let's say, referred from PartnerStack, a system that our partnerships team uses to refer leads, or events, if all of that is missing and you're giving a weight to a certain interaction, okay, well, now you actually have 5 more interactions that get weights. And so all of that shifts. So yeah, that's still probably my biggest qualm with HubSpot, is that they don't have that, but I'm happy that at least we found a solution. It's a very advanced one, I think, but it works. And we have an attribution model that now covers everything that's important for all of our teams, right? So not just marketing, but also sales and partnerships. And I think that, yeah, is a pretty good end result.
Well, and it's pretty amazing. I think not the majority of the teams would actually be able to build, like this workaround that, plugs and plays all the system into one to get those data, and also note to the HubSpot team, to the product backend to develop that part, which probably would be very useful to many other teams. But yeah, good job on that. Like with the hack, I was like pretty impressed by that.
Yeah.
And Yeah, moving into the kind of uh, s- friction session part where because you sit in between revenue and marketing and ops. So I can imagine that there is friction between the teams. Where do you see like the biggest friction when you try to align the different stakeholders?
Yeah, so I think there's a few, let's say, constant back and forth between sales and marketing. Again, when we talk about like sales did this, marketing did this, and figuring out who gets credit for one thing instead of working on things together, I think that's really common. Like that sales and marketing are constantly kind of butting heads on this thing. But I think when it comes to more the friction between operations and those teams, I think it's more so that oftentimes someone might come with a request for they want to track a particular data point or they want to set up a certain automation. And in those cases, they sometimes come with a solution instead of a problem. And so they have an idea of how it should work. And then revenue operations has to kind of be the bearer of bad news in saying, hey, technically that's going to be way more complicated than you think it is. And then you get into this conversation of what's the perfect solution for right now? Because we're not going to spend 4 weeks building something for an experimental campaign that we don't know how much revenue this is actually going to bring us versus something where we could put a revenue dollar on that dollar amount and say, okay, this makes sense to invest 4 weeks and then this is why it has this priority. And so I think you often have to take those requests that come in and push back a little bit, understand what they're trying to get to, and then lay out all these different options and say, this is why this might be the best solution for you.
Yeah, and how does that work? Like you just push back or you have like a reasoning or yeah, like is there, like priority based on estimated impact and revenue? Is there a system that you have in place in order to make those decisions?
Yeah, so we typically do look at the revenue that something's going to bring. I think also we have a lot of projects that you'll know are like at the very top of the organization, things that C-level are really interested and working on and that multiple teams are driving towards. So if something might fall within one of those goals, like let's say to put it into an example, right now we're doing a lot of pushes to get our customers from monthly plans onto yearly plans. So if there's a campaign that's going to be focused around yearly conversions, then we're going to say, okay, we know that this is like a big company goal at the moment. We need to invest the time in this. Whereas some of these small things, you might say, okay, does this even make sense to focus on right now? Because it's not the team's primary KPI. So I think we typically align that with what the business is looking at. And then also, have we done this before? And can we prove that it's going to be worthwhile? Because what you can also do then is say, all right, let's do this in this, let's say, scaled down way for now. And if it does bring business impact, then we have a great conversation that we can go have with leadership to say, we tried this out, it drives impact. Now we can invest those 4 weeks.
Moving into the last part of this interview and having, look at the industry realities and also lessons learned the hard way. To get your totally unfiltered view about the AI topics out there, we all know that everything is flooded with AI, content, tools, analytics, systems, and also changing privacy rules. So there is a change. And from your point of view, from the operational point of view, from revenue point of view, what is your view on where B2B marketing is actually heading towards?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, it's a massive shift. Everything is changing, I think, within marketing, and it's changing really quickly too, which is a difficult challenge to overcome because you might be ahead on Friday, and by Monday, there's a new model release, and everything has changed, and you got to learn again from scratch. So I think, yeah, it's hard to keep up for sure. But overall, I think from a marketing perspective, especially in terms of privacy and consent, I think that even digital touch points are becoming much more difficult to measure perfectly. I think that absolute perfect tracking is becoming a bit unrealistic. And yeah, that's because of privacy, but also because of AI-driven research and discovery. So I think all these ways that we're used to tracking things, we now need to accept a little bit of a shift towards more trends and uplifts than perfect precision, which I think is the way that we would typically measure something like an out of home campaign, right? Like what you might do is look at, did your traffic increase, or did our revenue increase in areas where we ran these ads, because we know that that's just not as easy to track. I think that we're going to see that more and more on the digital side as well, where we know that we can track a portion of this, but there's also a portion that we can't. And then we want to look at like uplifts and trends over time. And so, yeah, I think that more and more often, this unknown traffic that we were talking about, that's going to become much more common. And yeah, I think some teams are still adjusting to not having all of the perfect data points that they want.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because, I mean, you think in a world that's so digitalized that it should be possible, but at the same time with AI, you can't track back the origin, or there are just like so many touch points. And in B2B, it's not just one touch point that will make the decision. In B2C, also not, but in B2B, usually sales cycles tend to be longer. So maybe it's just like going back to the good old, mark on Google Analytics. Do you remember that? Where you just like manually enter like a campaign, and then from that campaign, you see if there is an impact in traffic coming to the website. Maybe that, or do you think there's something else happening with this shift?
Yeah, I'm curious because I think that I'm sure that there are tools that are going to pop up that will try to solve this. I think that this is going to be something that's becoming more and more common. So eventually someone's going to have, all right, let's think of a creative way to start measuring these things. I hope we don't go back to manually tracking these things, but maybe we have an AI agent that does that for us, for example, or that can analyze these types of things and give marketing teams a little bit of insights on those trends, because sometimes that's a little bit more difficult to spot if you're just looking at a dashboard. So I think we're going to find, new solutions and tools for this. But right now, I think we're still just getting into, I think we're still in the acceptance phase of that, right? Of accepting that that's the reality. I think once we get into the point of, okay, what do we do about this? I'm sure some tools are going to pop up that will help us out.
I like the idea of an agent taking care of adding the manual timestamp on it. And looking at your personal experience, if you look back into your career, both in marketing and revenue ops, do you have any single big lesson that you want to share that actually made your team more successful? So anything that you feel that really made the way you work or your entire team succeed?
Yeah, I think there are maybe two really big ones. One of them is when you're working in revenue operations, really understanding your full customer lifecycle. So that goes from understand how marketing creates their campaigns and targets and captures people, understand how sales converts them, understand how customer success actually works to grow a customer, to keep a customer. I think when you have all of that context, that puts you in a really good place from being like an execution focused role of marketing asked for this or sales asked for this, and turns you into more of a business partner for those teams, because you get a really nice bird's eye view of what is happening for the full go-to-market organization. And you can also advise them on where there's overlap or where they might be working in silos and how best to set things up. So I think that's a huge one, is you might not be customer facing, but know really like what your customers experience end to end. And then I think the other point is listening and learning how to ask really good questions, because sometimes people come with a request and it's ultimately not what they need once you get to the core of that. So I think that it's really important that you dig deep of what is this person trying to accomplish? What does success really look like? Sometimes that's a bit vague, I think, for some of the requests that we get. And if you can get to the bottom of that, then that helps you build the best process or the best system or the best dashboard to give them what they need. But I think if you're just kind of a yes man, and I think people in operations can be, right? Because we want to help people and I think we want to please. And so sometimes it's like, I want to build that for you, but pushing back on that and really understanding what they're trying to get to and making sure that you have that clearly ultimately is going to help you build something that's, much more suited for them in the long term.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's what you mentioned at the beginning. It's understanding the stakeholder and what they actually want to get, what they what they need to make decisions. And yeah, it's asking all those questions to understand how the end piece should look like. And would you also give those to, like advices to someone who would start in your role tomorrow, or is there any additional advice that you would give them?
Yeah, I would definitely give them that advice. I think I would also give them advice on how to manage what maybe is best practice versus how your business functions, because you might have the answer in like a marketing textbook of how this should work. But ultimately, if that doesn't work for your business, you're going to need to think of a better creative solution. So I think, yeah, it's also what you should build versus what works for your organization. And yeah, maybe just a contextual example of that is, again, our source tracking for marketing, really easy, first and last. When you talk about expanding that to something like sales and partnerships, then you need to apply much more advanced business logic on this to make sure that you're tracking that properly. And I'm sure there would be some people that would say, you shouldn't put business logic on your latest source, for example. Like it should always be the most recent. But from our side, what works for us and what helps us track what we need and give the leaders the data points that they need was building something that was a little bit out of the box. So I think finding that balance is also important.
Yeah, this reminds me of, I wouldn't call her mentor when I was studying. I was also working as a waitress in a restaurant, and she basically told me the first day where I was like doing a lot of fuck stuff, use your brain. So it's basically use your brain in order to, like get into the role and not just like execute dumbly, but like really think, then execute.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny that we need to have that as a reminder. I think it's an important one.
Yeah. Mira, we're at the end of our session. Would you like to share anything else? And is there a place where people can find more about you and your work?
Yeah, I would say the best place to connect with me is probably LinkedIn. I should be more active there. I have like platform fatigue. I need to get better in my LinkedIn game. But if you want to connect, if you're in Barcelona or in the Netherlands, I'm always happy to chat with people or meet up for a coffee. So yeah, feel free to shoot me a message there.
Awesome. I'll make sure that you're more active on LinkedIn. I will tag you in this chat. And yeah, thank you for all those insights, Mira. To our listeners, if you found this useful, please follow us, share this video, or tag someone along, and follow us. See you next time.